I wish I had more disclosures, but I have a couple. I don't think any actually are relevant here. I do get supported by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, which is the largest commercial payer in the state of Michigan, to advance quality in the state. And I appreciate all of you paying your taxes, help support my team. And I do serve as a consultant to AMSET. Just a couple learning objectives. The first one is I want to talk to you about several initiatives that we have done through the Perform Registry, focusing on evaluating acute kidney injury. And the second is to look into the future about what we are actually currently proceeding to do or preparing to do as relates to acute kidney injury prediction and prevention. Our story with Perfusion Registry, as Bob Groom had noted, began with the Northern New England Cardiovascular Study Group. It is a 8-center-based voluntary collaborative in Northern New England, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, that had a rich history of sharing data in an unblinded fashion to advance quality across the state. Even though it was suggested that they were competitive marketplaces, Northern New England has beautiful mountain ranges that makes it nearly impossible for some hospitals to actually be competitive with one another because of how long it takes to go over the presidential ranges. More recently, under Kenny Shan's presidential leadership, the Perform Registry became the official registry of AMSET, and AMSET became our official perfusion societal partner. And we had this mission, which is very akin to Northern New England Group, to advance quality through the benchmarking and sharing of unblinded data to sites. A little bit about our registry. The left-hand graph shows a distribution of procedures that are basically, on average, the types of procedures that our centers collect through the voluntary reporting. The vast majority of our coronary artery bypass grafting, isolated CABG. The others could be a CABG with some type of arrhythmic procedure. It could also include aortic procedures, basically procedures that don't have an STS predicted risk of mortality or major morbidity. And then valve operations become the more common operation. We probabilistically link each record of perfusion at our data coordinating center to a surgical registry, and then use those combined data sets to provide quarterly benchmarking reports to centers to advance quality and outcomes. On the right-hand side, I wanted to provide you a little bit of information about the procedural volume. So the vast majority of sites, around 22, it looks like, do 100 to 299 on bypass cases. We do not collect information around TAVRs or off-pump procedures. The next common is basically less than 100 cases annually, 300 to 499. And then we do have, it looks like, 5 centers currently in our registry that contribute more than 500. While we started this out as a pilot in the state of Michigan, and Michigan has represents all non-federal cardiac surgical programs in the state. The only one that does not contribute is the Veterans Administration. We do have sites that represent the United States. The green flags, they're called pins officially. The green pins reflect those who are participating. They are submitting data or in the final contracting process. The red are those who have initiated interest. In the last slide of my talk, I provide a QR code for those who are interested in initiating a conversation with us about participating. But again, you do see that while we have 33 sites in the state of Michigan and 124,000 procedures at this state, we do have representation beyond Michigan. The next phase of my talk is going to be focusing around publications specifically related to acute kidney injury. And these publications arise either from our data coordinating center at the University of Michigan or also sites who actually are participating. We do not claim or make any claim, and hopefully make no suggestion, that all knowledge arises from the data coordinating center. The knowledge and interest and engagement arises from those whose data we are honored and privileged to house and also to manage. So a couple of them. The first one will be around the use of conventional ultrafiltration and its association with acute kidney injury. The next will be an evaluation of sex-based differences in the relationship between nadir hematocrit bypass and acute kidney injury. And the third will be a focus on patient-based race and its association with acute kidney injury. To date, none of our analyses have ever focused on causality or inferring causality, but simply making associations between the relationship between what we see in the data and outcomes either that perfusionists are interested in or also cardiac surgeons. And I should have made this caveat that while we submit data quarterly back to sites for benchmarking purposes, each one of those reports go to the designated perfusion lead. I don't mean that from a title standpoint, a lead perfusionist, but the one who has been designated as the lead contact for Perform, and also to a surgeon champion. And the reason for that is to reduce barriers. So if you're focusing on acute kidney injury, that it's a team-based phenomenon is our supposition. And because of that, we send reports to surgeons and perfusionists at the same time to try to reduce silos. Theron looks basically the same now as he did back then. But this was an interest of ours as we heard narratives in our meetings around the role and relationship between ultrafiltration, conventional ultrafiltration, and acute kidney injury. We also focused on the notion that it may not just be around the use of ultrafiltration, but the amount of ultrafiltration is given back to the patient. So cardiac surgical patients may be exposed to hemodilution secondary either to priming with sanguineous fluid during bypass and the imbalance between the overall volume contained within the circuit and the patient's own circulating blood volume. One caveat, every single time I make a mistake, I'm going to blame it on the fact that I'm not a perfusionist. I'm not saying I'm not going to make a mistake. I'm going to say I intend to make mistakes. And it's the fact that the love of what I do is actually partnering with my clinical colleagues to advance quality and outcomes. Conventional ultrafiltration has been used to treat hemodilution and the effects of cardiopulmonary bypass circuits. But in this particular question, what we're interested in is as we try to advance acute kidney injury prevention, what is that relation between ultrafiltration and AKI? So what we did was we took nearly 6,500 consecutive first-time CABGs that were submitted to our registry between 2010 and 2013. This at the time was when we had 21 institutions participating in our registry. We excluded those who started out with dialysis because we're interested in the initial onset of acute kidney injury, and we also removed ZBUF. See, I can even use the acronyms, even though I'm not a perfusionist. Okay. And as I had said at the beginning, we centrally link or merge based upon the operation date, the institution, dates of service, a record from perfusion with a record from your own institutional surgical data. We defined acute kidney injury not because of how we wanted to do it, but based upon standardized criteria. In this case, it was acute kidney injury defined as greater than 3 milligrams per deciliter or a 50% relative increase in baseline serum creatinine. In terms of how we may have methodologically analyzed the data, my patients are older and sicker than your patients. Patients who develop AKI are older and sicker than those who didn't develop AKI. So for that reason, we adjusted for factors that were known preoperatively, intraoperatively, or additionally the hospital or year of the procedure, given that this occurred between 2010 and 2013. From the preoperative side, we're not asking you as you submit data to perform or intend to about a patient's presentation. That's what comes from that surgical record. So we adjusted for the patient's age, sex. You can read at your leisure the other types of preoperative factors. From an intraoperative standpoint, blood transfusion, the nadir hematocrit on bypass, and then the duration of cardiopulmonary bypass, as well as cross-clamp time. We were additionally interested, as I had said earlier, on not just cuff volume, not just cuff use, but also volume, and also the role of preoperative kidney function, that is estimated GFR. So a couple of findings from this paper that Theron led. 1 out of 5 patients actually received ultrafiltration across our sites. We do not standardize anything in perform. We simply look at the natural history of this experiment that occurs, that centers do things differently, or surgeons and perfusionists within centers do things differently. Patients who received conventional ultrafiltration were more likely to have adjusted median first hematocrit in the ICU. You can see that on your left, and also the duration of ICU. And that was basically an absolute difference of 1. So patients with cuff had an ICU duration of 2 days and then versus 1 day. What I note here are the adjusted outcomes. The adjusted outcomes, again, come from the surgical record that your institution owns and submits voluntarily to us. And I note in red, hopefully it looks like burgundy or Merlot or something like that for those who may be colorblind. But nonetheless, those with the arrows represent those instances where there was a significant association between cuff use and acute kidney injury, whether or not it's red blood cell, cuff use and outcomes, red blood cell transfusion, low cardiac output, which we traditionally define as 2 or more inotropes at 48 hours, or an intra-aortic balloon pump, or the need to go back on for cardiopulmonary bypass for about 20 more minutes for hemodynamic reasons, as well as that acute kidney injury outcome. Nonetheless, while there were significant associations between cuff use and those outcomes, there are also those instances where we did not see a signal, either quantitatively or qualitatively, and those are noted there in yellow. Readmission, prolonged intubation, which is basically an STS-defined outcome, which is being intubated for more than, I think it's 24 hours, the reoperation for bleeding, stroke, and death. But you also recall that we were interested in the amount of ultrafiltration and what is the relationship between a patient's pre-existing eGFR and ultrafiltration. And this is what we, and AKI, and this is what we do see. So that is, if a patient presented with a creatinine clearance of less than 99.6 milliliters per minute, there's an increasing volume of there's an increasing risk of cuff use and a higher adjusted AKI risk. That was significant. And that's called an effect modification. That is, appears to be a biologic plausibility between the relationship between a patient's pre-existing creatinine clearance and AKI as a function of ultrafiltration use. So that's one of our stories. Another story came from a surgical resident, a traditional tract surgical resident, Michelle Ellis, and she was interested in this notion that women are more likely to be exposed to nadir hematocrit on bypass, and there is this relationship between nadir hematocrit and bypass on acute kidney injury. So Dr. Ellis at the time, while she was at the University of Michigan, I believe she's now a attending thoracic surgeon somewhere in the Midwest, helped lead us this study again with Theron when he was at the University of Michigan. So you see here on the right-hand side, a single report by Mehta and colleagues in 2013, which noted that women had a lower risk of AKI relative to men, even though they were exposed to, or more likely to be exposed to nadir hematocrit on bypass during their cardiac surgical operation. What we were interested in doing was to see in a larger data set, a more current cohort, whether or not this relationship actually persisted. And our goal in Perform is not to entertain issues. Our goal in Perform is to understand current relationships in practice and engage with you and your surgical and anesthesia colleagues to redesign the building blocks. The way I think about my own work is basic and translational scientists take microscopes to the building blocks of organisms. I like to think about my work as I take a microscope to healthcare delivery, and I work with you to redesign those building blocks to kind of genetically engineer how care is delivered to make it safer. So in this case, we took about 15,000 non-dialysis, again, because we're interested in new onset of AKI patients. A third of those patients were female, and this was between 2010 and 2014. At this time, we then had 26 institutions voluntarily participating in our registry. Just like in the initial paper around cuff use, we centrally linked every perfusion record with a surgical record in order that we can take advantage of the information in both data sets and minimize the burden of data collection at our participating hospitals. While in the initial study, we're looking at any AKI, in this study, we focused on the most severe AKI, stage 2 or A3 AKI, using the Aiken criteria. A couple of findings that came out of this study. One, nadir hematocrit less than 21% was more common among women than men. Not surprising. Relatively speaking, it was a threefold increased exposure to nadir hematocrit on bypass. The second finding was that AKI was not significantly different among men than women. However, there was an interaction. That is, for a given hematocrit, with women being more likely to be exposed to nadir hematocrit on bypass than women, there was a significant reduced odds, adjusted odds of AKI among women than men. Hypothesis generating, the question then becomes, what mechanistically is underlying this effect? The third finding from our registry, the third study for our registry came from a longstanding colleague and friend, Mike Hung, who is a nephrologist, focuses on the inpatient service at the University of Michigan. I think he also works at the VA in Ann Arbor. In most cases, what we try to do when we show pictures is to show pictures of people smiling. So Dr. Hung is smiling in this case because we're focusing on renal issues, given he's a nephrologist. So prior reports had associated patients with Black race with renal dysfunction having more risk with renal dysfunction after cardiac surgery. And what we wanted to, in this case, was to identify this relationship between patient race and acute kidney injury in a large contemporaneous observational cohort. So we wanted to do that, and we did that through the same type of analytical approaches I described in the prior two studies. In this case, we had 34,500 patients undergoing adult cardiac surgery between July 2014 through June of 2019. In this case, we had 43 institutions at this time contributing data to the PERFORM registry. We excluded patients yet again who presented with dialysis because we're interested in new onset of acute kidney injury. We also excluded patients who had missing creatinine, race, or predicted risk of major morbidity and mortality, the latter two again coming from the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Harvest files that were submitted on behalf of the center to our data coordinating center. And again, we probabilistically linked our records and focused, similar to Dr. Ellis's work, on stage 2 or 3 AKI. What I show here in red are significant relationships between any AKI, the first row, stage 2 or 3 AKI in the second row, and then new dialysis requiring AKI. In all these instances, there was an increased relationship between a patient presenting as Black to their clinical team and the risk of AKI, any stage 2 or 3, or dialysis. If you then create an odds ratio, or relative odds, another way of saying is patients of Black race relative to those who were white race had a 50% increased adjusted odds of acute kidney injury that was stage 2 or 3, the most severe types of acute kidney injury. We also said, you know what, people like to do this propensity score method, which basically creates this fictional randomized trial out of data. Our findings were robust when comparing a traditional logistic regression model relative to a propensity model. This is the first chapter of this story. I only have 10 more chapters to go to try to minimize the amount of time that Dr. Baker has for his presentation. So just briefly, I'm teasing. Most of my jokes also fall flat. So a couple of things about what we're doing. Oh, thank you, Shauna. A couple more things that I wanted to focus on, which is more future thinking. In the current model for Perform, what we do is we ask individual centers to submit data and enter the data onto a cloud-based environment. I'm told by Don, it's basically 8.5 minutes. 8.5 minutes if you're a really typist, either with your devices or on your computer, probably can take slower than that. But nonetheless, that is the traditional paradigm. And as we look at acute kidney injury across the institutions, it kind of looks like this. There's this natural history. There's some sites on the left-hand side where they have a very low rate of any AKI, and those sites that have a very high rate of AKI. This is not risk adjusted, but nonetheless, this is this natural experiment that there's something going on under the hood at these sites where real estate is destiny. If you're at one site, you're likely to have a very low AKI rate, and another site, you're going to be having a really, relatively speaking, higher AKI rate. And then on the right-hand side, it's this most severe AKI rate. While the absolute difference is lower, so the y-axis I tried to keep the same way so that I'm not trying to present you with something that may be a bit deceiving. It goes from like almost 0% to 10%. There still is the case. Real estate gives us a sense of where you actually are going to have a higher versus a lower risk of an AKI. What we wanted to do was to partner with other organizations as we try to redesign again these building blocks of healthcare organization delivery to make it safer, which is, I think, all of our intended goals. So when you look at the literature around renal dysfunction, most of the literature focuses on renal failure, right? Does the patient present with dialysis? Not surprising, because that's what the Society of Thoracic Surgeons does in its adult cardiac surgery database. I imagine at this point in time, there's a greater preponderance of perfusionists who appreciate the fact that it's not just renal failure that's important, it's also acute kidney injury, this broader encompassing issue that patients after surgery relative to the first time all of a sudden have higher creatinines, and that ultimately are associated with higher rates of major morbidity and mortality, resource utilization, and readmissions. So our goal in partnership with the Society of Thoracic Surgeons is to do two things. We wanted to identify pre-bypass factors that are associated with acute kidney injury. And then once we get to that, the next step then is to develop another model that says, once you're actually on bypass, what are the sets of factors that we can do to mitigate that risk so that risk is not inevitable? One slight caveat here, one slight nuance here, is that we intend that first model, which only includes factors that are known at the time of just before you go on bypass, is used as an opportunity to inform the preoperative brief. That is the pre-incision timeout. So surgeon may be talking about the type of operations that they intend to do. Some instances at some hospitals, they talk about the patient's mortality risk, their stroke risk, their renal failure risk. Here would be an opportunity in this future state that we also talk about acute kidney injury. And a perfusionist, if inclined, can talk about their ANH volume that they're taking off, their RAP volume, things that are known at that time that also may help the team understand your combined efforts with other members of the team to try to mitigate acute kidney risk. More to come on that, but that is work that is actually ongoing at our data coordinating center. Those who are participants, you're more than happy to help us with this. Those who are future participants, once you become a perfusion, a perform center, you also can help. Try to make sure that the work that we're doing is relevant, not just to others, but also to you. So I'm super excited about this because this is a partnership with the Task Force on Quality Initiatives with the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. And I also just want to give a shout out to Kenny Shan because it was his presentation at the Massachusetts General Hospital that helped initiate this work. So I want to give credit where credit is due. The second part is basically the second project is salivating at what Rob does and Tim does and others do down under, where they have continuous electronic perfusion data that helps us inform more concisely what actually is going in the operating room, because we're not there yet. So in order to get a little bit closer to that, what we are doing is piloting at 3 centers with a multi-perioperative outcomes group. It's an anesthesia research and quality collaborative to extract electronic perfusion data, minute-to-minute data, to try to understand how to build quality measures around oxygen delivery. The slide on the right is a recent publication from the University of Michigan that we are validating at 3 other institutions that suggests that current DO2 models identify cut points of oxygen delivery that do not reflect biological plausibility. What I mean just shortly there, just briefly, is that all of a sudden, if you think, if this is the y-axis on an XY axis, and this is oxygen delivery, at some cut point, the risk goes from here to here, right? It's an immediate jump, and that actually is not biologically plausible. It's probably somewhere in between. Our data suggests that there may be a biostatistical approach that may reflect more biological plausibility. So more to come, but we're working with the what's called MPOG, multi-perioperative outcomes group, that spans across the United States and internationally, to try to come up with a better way to siphon, if you will, data from the electronic health record. And the last thing, for those that wish to, and I apologize, it gave me this dinosaur when I created a QR code, but for those who are interested in contributing or learning more about the data, you could click on this QR code. The mechanism thereafter is you get the greatest opportunity in your life to talk with Don Nieder, who will introduce you to a little bit about what we do, what our goals and aspirations are. The website also goes through, if you would rather do it at your own leisure, in between cases or some other way. We go through a step-by-step approach about how do you actually begin contributing to the data. We want this data to be the community's work. We want to help you break down barriers to your institution and make care more reliable and safer. But without further ado, thank you for the opportunity to present, share a bit of our work, and I look forward to discussions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Donnie, for excellent presentation. Thank you.
Yes.
We transition to Rob's slides. Donnie, I can just tell you that you can actually get rid of that dinosaur. You can just put your picture in there or whatever you want. It doesn't matter.
That could scare people off.
Mm. Who knows? Yeah. Can we get Rob's slides on, please?
So we do have to start with a level playing field here, Shana. Donnie's jokes are never funny.
Yes, they are.
I thought that was funny.
I mean, what an interesting presentation. I've taken 8 pages of notes and I was going to give my talk. I'm wondering whether I just give my notes because, it is such a joy to listen to Donnie talk about what the Perform Registry's done over, how long has it been going now, Donnie? About 14 years?
Yeah, something like that.
And, I remember when it was in its embryonic form and, we're talking about starting it, and it's just grown into this beautiful registry, and it just continues to grow. And it's a real reflection of the type of people that are involved in perfusion. Perfusionists care. Perfusionists want to see better outcomes. So, yeah, thank you, Donnie. It's a joy. Okay, so the thing that's not necessarily a joy, and actually Donnie, I do have to quote him, but Donnie said, "Thank you for the opportunity to present." Yeah, thank you, Donnie, for the opportunity to present in New Orleans on Sunday morning. That was a real privilege. Okay. I'm gonna have to do the slides myself. Thanks, Daniel. Daniel's really done a great job during this conference. Yeah, mate, if you want to come up and sit at the podium, that's okay. As I said the other day, look, you all know I'm from Australia. This is a picture of Samuel's Gorge. Unfortunately, I couldn't get one without the wine glasses in front of it. But last Saturday, my wife and I had the privilege of going to Samuel's Gorge, and this time of year is harvest, so vintage. So I'm going to share a little bit of the, I guess, the hard working side of what happens in a winery. And as you can see there, that's it's not actually a chalkboard. It's a 6-ton vat, old-fashioned slate vat. And the winemaker was taking us through the process of converting sugar to alcohol and CO2. And the drum you can see in the foreground, there was about probably 8 or 10 of these, 8 of these drums. They're 2-ton drums each. And they were going, each drum was at a different stage of the process. My wife had the opportunity to participate in the making of the vintage, and here Marianne's pumping the wine from the bottom of the vat onto the top of the grapes to keep the grapes moist during the process. The vat that she was working on was about halfway through the process. It was probably at about 6% alcohol. We did have the opportunity to taste the grape juice when it was 100% sugars, all the way through, as you can imagine, to when it was all wine. This is going through the process. Here they're tipping grapes into a basket press, the inside of a basket press. The basket press just then got that liner got put into the basket press, and you can see the pink at the bottom is the grape juice coming out as the initial formation of the wine. The chap there in the middle is the winemaker, and he's giving one of the didactic lectures of the day. And then, of course, we did have to do a little bit of tasting, but sometimes it's a hard gig. Now, I did take a bit of a list of the people that attended last night, and there's some fairly significant people missing from the room, but I think Bob Groom's attended enough conferences that he can sleep in this morning. The way we're going to, is Bob here now? Oh, Bob, fantastic. It's only Eugene that hasn't come. That's okay. No, look, is Eugene here too? Anyway, I can't see from up here, but it's the way I'm going to present this morning is I'm going to talk a little bit about what Donnie talked about with registries, talk about oxygen thresholds, look at some data, and hopefully we'll walk out with a little bit more knowledge. Donnie presented 3 papers from Perform. I just wanted to remind you all that the contribution of registries to where we're going is really important. The way we write our guidelines, the highest level of evidence is the randomized controlled trial. Probably 6 or 8 years ago, the AHA recognised the importance of registries and put registry data right up the top of that pyramid. And we've been able to contribute through our registries to significant knowledge improvements in our specialty. Our registry, the ANZ CPR, has published in the space of rewarming temperature, oxygen delivery. We've looked at Jehovah's, we've looked at flow and pressure, working on projects with Perform now. It's, for those of you who are not contributing to registries, contribute to the manufacturers, help us make the transfer of data easier. It's really important. Okay, so let's take this topic of oxygen delivery thresholds. We all know that in about 2005, Marco Ranucci published this paper. And in that paper, he said, his results section said that the best predictor for acute renal failure and peak postoperative serum creatinine was the lowest oxygen delivery with a critical value of 272. And this number sort of stuck with the community a bit. But Marco is actually an incredibly smart man. And in the discussion, he said, basically the message is that we should adapt pump flow to hematocrit, being ready to increase it in order to perfuse the patient with an oxygen delivery higher than 270 or 280. He already knew that that number wasn't the threshold. It was just the starting point. So what is the threshold? I mean, you think to yourself, and look, it is an absolute privilege to be invited back to this meeting. I love AMSEC and I love speaking at AMSEC meetings. Sometimes it's not quite so much fun when someone else gives you your topic title. So what is threshold? Well, I was looking it up. It's the floor of an entrance to a building or a room. That didn't quite seem to fit the bill. So I had to Google and keep reading. So it's a level or a point to which you start to experience something. Now, I think many of us had the opportunity to reach a threshold last night. I certainly felt as though I started to experience something, or which certainly something started to happen. I don't know what it was, Bourbon Street, music, couple of glasses of water, and all of a sudden. So look, there's a myriad of publications, and I'm not going to go into the detail of these publications, but I'm going to share with you a lot of different papers, just to remind us that there's a lot of input going on here. This one's from Switzerland, and I just really like this particular quote from that paper. Although the minimum kidney oxygen delivery index during bypass has been reported, the optimal threshold value has not yet been established. Now, what's this? This could be the Holy Grail. Now, we could go two ways in this presentation from this point, but I am actually going to stick back on the AKI trail. But it was tempting to go in a different direction. So this paper is talking about, do optimal prognostic thresholds and continuous physiological variables really exist? And, every clinician is faced with this question. We have so many numbers in the work that we do. Doctors all over have all these physiological variables, and we're trying to work out, do we have cut points? What do they mean? This patient presents with a range of different physiological and comorbidities. So what do the numbers mean? So although most clinicians are aware that the majority of biological variables with diagnostic and prognostic value act continuously within populations, we're encouraged to accept that there are cut points all the way through. And we know that those cut points are actually very artificial. They're very helpful, but they're artificial. Now, this is actually generated from random computer-generated data. But what it's showing is that there are just lots of different patterns. And in actual fact, Marco Rinucci's most recent paper shows that for various factors that affect AKI, the parameters that influence it, actually, the relationships all vary. You can see on the bottom, oh, Daniel. No.
Yeah.
I've got a different slide. Now, Daniel's really working hard on the ARS, but we're not there yet, mate. I've got a slide showing me a number of different parameters and the most recent parameters out of Rinucci's paper. You have the first ARS question.
Yeah, we just want it mirrored. We just want that to be mirrored to those.
I just want the same slide.
It's mirroring.
Mirrored. Daniel? Okay, I'm going to give you a word picture of what I can see, and Daniel will give us the opportunity to catch up in a minute. So all I was trying to say was that, some data is related in a linear fashion if you think bypass time and outcome, and some data like, oh, here we go. Let's see if we get the next bit. Press the button. You could think this is a Bourbon Street effect, but it's not. It's just, here we go. Go back 1, 2, there we go. Okay. So yeah, you look at the bottom left hand, your right hand, 2, looking at duration of bypass and lactate, and that's a linear relationship. go directly above that in the, what is it, right-hand quadrant, you've got critical DO2, and that's a cubic function. So we know that the relationships vary a lot. Yeah, there's not one rule that fits all. We also know that thresholds, should they exist, are going to be impacted by a whole lot of different things. I mean, not all patients present in the same manner. You know, if you took Donnie and I and you took us to a hospital and they'd say, well, okay, you're both male. And that's where the similarity ends. Donnie's good looking, I'm old. Donnie's fit, I'm not quite so fit. But biologically, you know, we're going to have a lot of variation, and the way the thresholds would impact us are going to vary a lot. So there's not one universal threshold. It's a widely accepted explanation, but it's not really the truth. An alternative way of looking at this is that we've really misunderstood the statistics. And, you know, let's be realistic. We're not all statistical champions that understand everything that's going on. So it's quite realistic that we've misinterpreted the way that what the statistics are trying to tell us. And it's also really important to understand it's that shape of that relationship that's going to make the final impact. So AKI, we know there's a spectrum. So there's going to be a spectrum of how patients present. It's going to be a spectrum of how or what level of, let's say in this case, oxygen delivery is going to upset the kidney. So we just need to recognise that no two patients are the same. Every time we go into the operating room, there's only one thing that's really important, and that's that patient, and we've got to do our best for that patient. So what do you think? So Daniel, we can have the ARS now. Sorry, mate. So if you use oxygen delivery to guide your perfusion, do you have a target value to keep above? Now, I think we had about 40% of people who were using oxygen delivery routinely. So Daniel, can we have the ARS on the screen, please? You don't have to put your hand up, Shana. You're pointing. Just while it's coming up, I'll get a bit of water. Okay, that's, oh, here we go. You know, you're never meant to perform with children or animals or ARS slides. This could be a terminal event for me. Okay, we're not going to worry about the ARS. So here we go. So if you do use DO2 regularly, you are much more likely to have set some sort of target value. And if you go to the next one, Daniel, let's see what people are actually targeting. Here we go. Okay, so no, I can't really. Okay, so it's in that Ranucci number range. So it goes from below 230 is at the top of the screen to above 300, 350 at the bottom. So we can see that that middle range is where people definitely are sitting at the moment. And that really reflects that that's what the literature is saying at the moment. So we are practicing according to the evidence that's available to us. That's fantastic. That's what we should be doing. So I'm going to just share a little bit of the data. And given it's Sunday morning, I thought we wouldn't dig too deep. So I'm just going to share with you the headlines of the papers and just talk a little bit. And what's really exciting, all the time.
Back up to his presentation, data oxygen delivery. Look at some of the data.
And actually, I don't mind if we start again, because I really enjoy the winemaking stuff.
It says a look at some of the data. Slide 20. Please and thank you.
This is where I'm from. This is Samuel's Gorge Winery.
There you go.
Okay. Okay.
Daniel, he hates us.
He's doing a fine job. It's not easy following me. I don't always follow so well. What I thought I'd do is I've separated the literature into cohorts. So this is the pediatric literature, and then I'll just share with you some single center stuff and some registry stuff. So, yeah, there's been an absolute growth in literature in the pediatric space. And, there's been I could probably put 30 papers up. I'm not quite sure how many there are, but, the message is very clear. Different threshold, different values are being talked about. This paper by Hayward and authors, they came up that the number in their population, and I stress that their population was around 350. And then Molly from the group at CHOPS, that's right, it's not CHIPS, it's CHOPS, and Tammy Rosenthal, they actually looked at their population and said, well, the really little neonates are different to the infants. They had different oxygen delivery thresholds for those two populations. So within their patient population, they had come up with different numbers or different thresholds. So what we've got to understand is this is just telling us about variation. This is telling us that in every centre that we work at, and once again, the slides are just fractionally behind me. That's not unusual when you come from Australia. I mean, you're a little bit ahead. In actual fact, it's Sunday evening. My wife's just gone to bed, and I actually woke up a couple of minutes late because every morning I give her a call, and so we just had to do the text thing. And she's had a really good day. But Daniel, could we catch the slide up? Because ad-libbing is not really my thing. I have all these words on the slides. Okay, let's just. Okay, what we're going to do is I'm just going to look a bit more at the slide screen and not at the confidence monitor because I'm not so confident in that. Oh, wow, we've gone way different. Okay, where are we up there? Okay, these are, so moving on from the pediatric groups, these are single centre papers. Now, sometimes people sneer a bit at single centre papers, but they're fantastic. They give us a lens into a particular group of people's practice. They show us what's really happening at their centre. And, one of the big detractions in the literature, to my mind, is that we're not necessarily encouraged to publish the same thing as someone else. Every paper that Perform publishes, my registry should publish exactly the same paper with or as close to the same methodology, because we need to see whether we get the same results. And this is what the single centre stuff does for us. It's showing us what's happening out there in the real world. Okay, now we're back on the same page. Registries. And you wouldn't think Donnie and I are passionate in this field. This is the Specialty Care Registry, and they've been using DO2 as a quality indicator. And they've done some really nice work. They've used the Ranucci type number of about 280, I think they used in this, to set up their quality improvement process. And this is our work from a few years ago. The difference, okay, there's 21,000 patients. That's a pretty good number. The single centre studies have shown us what's happening at the individual level. This is telling us at a group level, and we're getting the same sort of things. In this study, we found that the optimal threshold was about 270. Doesn't mean it's right, but it's saying where we're at the moment and with the way that we can understand things at the moment. Then we have the RCTs. This was the original RCT. I've never been involved in an RCT that had so many problems. To get this piece of work published, you would not believe how hard it was. There were changes in the protocol. There were changes in the safety monitoring. There's all sorts of stuff went on, but it was appropriate that it got published into the literature and gave us a baseline. This second paper from Makeda and the group in Japan had us used a different threshold. They've used a 300 threshold, but their answer is exactly the same. So we know that there is some mythical number that we can dichotomize our trials around, but the bottom line is a bit more oxygen delivery, a lot better outcome. It's funny. When I was walking down Bourbon Street last night, I did look over my shoulder quite a bit, and now I understand why, because I just got to make sure the slides are the same. Hey, this is an old paper. This is actually from our meeting in Colorado in 2016. Hands up if you're at the Colorado meeting in 2016. All right. We had a fantastic session, and I reckon that might have been on a Sunday morning too, talking about variation in how we measure and report oxygen delivery. And this was what we tried to do after that meeting was get all of the presenters to put their talks and presentations together for publication in the journal. And Bob drove that. He was very adamant that what we had to do was convert the sharing and the knowledge we get at these meetings into things in the literature. And I had a real joy in putting my paper together. And what we talked about a lot was variation in practice. And this is some data from our registry. And this first frame is just showing you bypass time. And you can see, okay, there's not much variation there. We all know we tend to have the same sort of patients. The ANZ CPR registry is an adult registry. And the data we report is what we call our core data set. So it's coronary artery bypass grafting, valve replacement, and combined valve graft operations. So you'd expect that everyone would sort of face the same thing. If we look at the average pressure on bypass, now this is continuous data, and you can see, well, there's actually quite, Donnie was talking about geography, and that's what we're seeing here. This is in terms of an individual perfusionist, but it's the same thing. If you get a perfusionist on the right-hand side or the left-hand side, you're going to have quite a different experience. And here we go looking at cardiac index. Now, that's an amazing amount of variation, isn't it? You wouldn't think that just which perfusionist you had determined your transfusion. I mean, Donnie showed us that there was variation by centre. This is variation by perfusionist. If you're the guy on the right of the screen or the guy on the left, your likelihood of being transfused is quite different. And then, of course, I had to share DO2 because that's what the talk's about. So what are we talking about? We're talking about understanding what we do, and we're all here for only one reason, to improve. So not only is there variation in practice, there's variation in measurement. This is a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. An error does not become truth by reason of multiplied propagation, nor does the truth become error because nobody will see it. Ha ha! You thought I was going to show you something very special. I thought I was going to show you something too.
Oh, there it goes. No.
Ah, that is me. Everyone's noticed I've had this brace on my hand because as you get old, funny things happen. And there's 4 buttons on this, and I pressed the wrong button. There we go. That wasn't Daniel's fault. So let's talk about variation in measurement. Now, we know that our 2 leading manufacturers can't agree on the same damn formula in their machines. I mean, we pointed this out 9 years ago. You think that everyone could come and deliver to the same table for us. If you're using device X, and I won't name them, Spectrum, the value you get on your machine is 20 points lower than if that you're using the Connect formula. I mean, why, guys? Give us a break. It doesn't need to be that way. But the other thing is that we see a lot of variation in reporting. We need to ensure that when we see a paper on DO2, and if we went back to all of the papers I presented, I want to know as a perfusionist, you're talking to me about DO2. What's the flow? What's the pressure during that case? What's the average DO2? I don't just want to hear about the nadir here, DO2 or the area under the curve. I want to know what's actually happened during that case. We've been talking about this for a long time in terms of us reporting properly. We can do it. It's not that hard. So this is a paper from Richard and myself. We published a number of years ago. And the only reason I'm showing it to you is because I'm very proud of all the work we do. But more importantly, this was looking at the area under the curve. This is a Laos plot. And you can see where the inflection point is. We've dichotomized around 270, and it seems to be about right with the data. You know, we get that inflection point when we start to have more time with a low DO2 than a high DO2. These are some numbers. We don't need to worry about that. This paper by Aniti, I think it's a really nice paper because very good methodology. They tell us what's going on. They tell us about the equipment they've used. They've told us what monitoring they've done. They've told us how they did their DO2. Very informative results and pretty. This looked nice. I liked to see what they were talking about. They had a total area under the curve calculation, and then they have this largest area under the curve, the red zone. So that was really nice. But there's a lot missing in most papers, okay? And, you know, we're just not encouraged to reproduce our work, as I said earlier. So we're still looking. I just want to touch on risk prediction, which Donnie mentioned to us. Donnie's group is working with the multi-centre perioperative outcome group, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that. Dr. Iannucci has just recently published at the beginning of this year a preliminary model. It's only from about 900 patients from memory. It's a single centre experience, but it's going to show us the way. It's not going to give us the answer. It won't be correct. It will be improved upon. But this, what he calls the multifactorial dynamic perfusion index, is the guiding light at the moment. And it's fantastic, the amount of work and effort that Professor Iannucci puts into our specialty. He's looked at a whole lot of different parameters and come up with this model. As I said earlier, you know, we recognise that all of these parameters shape different. His model's good, but it's not perfect, as I said. We've been doing similar work in the ANZ CPR. We recently published a predictive model for mortality, showing the importance of perfusion related variables on mortality models. And, you know, for a long time, we've focused on AKI. As I talked about the other day, we need to have a broader focus than just acute kidney injury. We need to think a lot more about our patients. We need to think about different ways of measuring outcomes. But this guy blew me away. I'm sure he blew you away the other day. Professor Dias, I mean, Donnie was kind enough to help me contact Professor Dias and ask permission to put his slide up. And, you know, this is the future. How proud should we be as a profession that someone like him is focusing on our work and trying to work out what happens and how we influence outcome. And, you know, the yellow box is if you get a low DO2. The green in the middle are the causative factors, and on the right-hand side of the actions. But you get a reduction in your DO2. So is it because of impaired drainage? These are the sort of things he's looking at to put into his AI model. I mean, this is fantastic. This is shatteringly good. And then it's going to come up with some ideas about what we should be doing. You know, let's just wait for the venous drainage to improve. Let's tell the surgeon. You know, and I think he had about 15 different actions there. So look, watch this space. This is going to explode for us, and this is going to be fantastic. Think about it. You know, you're on the pump, and we're all really diligent. You're looking at all the monitoring, and in your earphone it says, "Rob, looks like your DO2 is heading down. I think," this is the AI girl or boy. Yeah. "I think there might be an airlock." You know, I mean, how helpful would that be? Ahead of you, way ahead of you, is this AI. So I'm just going to finish up by, what do the guidelines say about thresholds? So this is the paper by our moderator, Luke, and the European group. It was in a section called Recommendations for Pump Flow Management During Bypass. Bang. The pump flow rate should be adjusted according to the arterial oxygen content in order to maintain a minimal threshold of DO2 under moderate hypothermia. 2A, level B. Our own guidelines. Here we go. In adult cardiac surgery with bypass, a goal-directed DO2 strategy is recommended to reduce the risk of cardiac surgery-associated AKI. What did you notice in both of those guidelines? No numbers. The people who put these together weren't going to put out a threshold value. In the literature that supports these two sets of statements, there's numbers, but this is saying it's the principle of we don't know the number yet. So we're at that crossroads. I think we know the way forward. This doesn't look at all like Bourbon Street. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this two magnificent presentations. I'm really impressed. Thank you both. Thank you both. These presentations are open for discussion. We have a lot of questions, and there's some questions from the virtual audience as well. And well, one of the questions was, what is the optimal hematocrit during the pump? But that's the $1 million question, of course. Shanna, do you have a question?
Oh, no, do you want a chance to answer that?
I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah.
I think it's all context dependent.
Yeah.
Because there's not one hematocrit on bypass. And also a hematocrit for a woman is going to be a hematocrit that's going to be different for a man about how you treat it. So I think the jury's out still on that.
And I'll have a crack too. We're focusing on hematocrit during bypass. What we should be doing is helping the team that we work with to promote the patients come in with a much higher baseline hemoglobin. You know, I think we talked about it yesterday or the day before. You know, optimizing our patient, ensuring that they're in the best possible condition to have their operation. We're doing a whole lot of work at the moment looking at the impact of discharge hematocrit or discharge hemoglobin on long-term outcome. Yeah, this is a big story. There is no one number, of course, that's going to be right. And as Donnie said, gender is a big player in this, but also comorbidities. I mean, you know, a overweight male with, you know, the full list of comorbidities is going to have a different situation to a healthy person undergoing bypass. So, yeah, it's tailor-made. It's all individual patient based. We can have rules and theories, but we've got to focus on the individual.
Yeah, and with regards to the difference between men and women, there's some work going on about the effect of estrogen on cardioprotective, renal protective effects of that. So we should also be looking at premenopausal and postmenopausal women.
Yeah, and we don't have, we explored that with the paper with Dr. Hung. We just didn't have the data in our registries to be able to address it. So we hypothesized that that was an area for future investigation, but not necessarily that, at least within our registry, that we could actually comment on.
Oh, great. Please.
Good morning. Thank you, Rob and Donnie, for taking us through all this literature. Really appreciate it. I don't think we can, I don't think we do wrong from reviewing this again and again and again. And, you know, all of us out here in the audience, the world in the audience, we want a number and we want to know what to do. And thank you for reminding us that, you know, we see through a glass darkly still, and we don't know exactly what that number is and where that threshold is. But so I guess you're telling us to be patient. You're telling us to continue to submit data and collect data. I think that's a really a good thing. I have a question for Donnie. And you know, you talked about the timeout and looking at the patient, that let's say we have a patient on the schedule that has a high risk for acute kidney injury. Based on the publication, yours and Theron's publication about ultrafiltration, what should
Hmm.
the team or the perfusionists be thinking about in terms of how they apply ultrafiltration to that patient, or is it relevant?
Yes, thank you, Bob. I would just add one caveat before I answer your specific question. So I don't think it's just around submitting data. I think it's about engaging and helping us to understand what the data means, right? Because I think with that, the contextualization that you also brought up, yesterday is so critical because there's not one answer about how to interpret something and to bring it to the complex organizations that we all live in the environments we live in. I would say that I would rely on my clinical colleagues to inform us about what exactly should you do in a given case. But I think that should probably come from the collective wisdom in that operating room, or even preceding that operating room as you have a conversation around the patient in front of you. I don't know at this point. I guess I would say that at this point we don't know necessarily what the algorithm should be, but in absence of that, AMSEC standards and guidelines said you should have a protocol. And I guess I would push it back onto the institution to say, within the confines of your institution, what should our plan be? So you're not making the plan on the fly, but you've had enough reflection around, in these types of scenarios, what would be the armamentarium that we have available to us to make the best decision for that patient in that context. Because I think when we make a decision on the fly, it's subject to some degree of potential error. What are your thoughts? How would you, if I push it back onto you?
Yeah.
Because you have a memory that spans beyond anyone else's about individual papers, and you think about this deeply. What would you say where we are right now?
Memory, but I think that I heard this morning exactly what I expected to hear, that these answers, there's still work to be done. And thank you for clarifying that and reminding us of the role of being involved in the interpretation of the data.
Yeah.
I think that we're in better shape than we were 5-10 years ago in terms of understanding, but I think we have a ways to go.
Yeah, I think we all benefit from having more centers contributing. That gives us the broader breadth of the natural variation that exists in the field. And because of that, I think we can create more wisdom about what are the circumstances in which people currently practice that may be contributing, not causality, may be contributing to better outcomes for different patient subgroups.
Thank you.
Yep.
Please.
I'm Mark Priest from Spectrum Medical. Great presentation, great review of all the DO2I work, especially including the pediatric information, which I think is important and a little bit newer than some of the historical information. With all the focus on DO2I, there's a lot of discussion, but I don't see a lot of publication in terms of looking at the consumption variables. So VO2I, VCO2I, and then correlating the delivery to the consumption, looking at extraction ratios and perfusion ratios. So the question is, do we just assume that the consumption is somewhat controlled because the patient's anesthetized and cooled and we're not looking at that as much and there's a big focus on the delivery? Or do you think that's part of the next frontier as we start to have a better handle on DO2I? And now we need to answer that ultimate question of, well, is that DO2I meeting the metabolic demand?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a really good question. And it is where we're going to go. One of the issues, and I'll swing to the CO2 variables, that side of the equation. The reason that we haven't focused in that space is because the measurement is so unreliable, I guess. We've used exhaust capnography for probably a decade since we did the GIF trial. And it drives my practice, and I know that if I'm measuring it correctly, it's really good. But the literature's not there, and we're not in that space yet. And oxygen consumption's in that same area, I guess. DO2 is sort of simple. And, the whole DO2 paradigm is somewhat artificial. You're running along. When you turn the flow up, you're getting a genuine increase in oxygen delivery. When you drop a bag of red cells in, you're getting an increase in your hematocrit. What's happening at the cellular level is not marrying numbers on your screen. But, all we can do is thank, Spectrum Medical especially for pushing perfusionists and the rest of the industry in a fantastic direction. Spectrum came in and really challenged the paradigm, and we're just going forward at a good rate. And these, consumption, what's happening is we're just going to get better measurements. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Looks like we have time for one more question.
As everyone said, this has been an outstanding summary of this complex problem. I'm raising another issue that I'm sure we don't have time to discuss, but that is, what do we do about it when it's low? And everyone says we should watch it, and but what do we do about it? And we know there are two ways, easy ways. We can raise the crit, but I'm skeptical rather raising the crit with blood actually improves oxygen delivery. We know that that blood we give really doesn't release oxygen. And the other is to raise flow, and our surgical colleagues don't like us to do that. And finally, is there any data in the literature that changing practice in the middle of a case improves outcome? We've sort of gone through this with cerebral oximetry. We know low cerebral oximetry is bad, but the data that making it better is, except for anecdotal cases, is, I'm sorry I've raised so much issues, but thank you very much.
I would just add one caveat to that. And as someone who considers himself a methodologist, I don't know what too low means, because I do think that the current literature is biased and does not reflect biological plausibility. The second thing I would say, so I think more work has to be done, and actually, how do we actually calculate a critical oxygen delivery to then help inform clinical teams about when to do. And I would also say we should push the conversation around what we should do before we actually get into that point. And that's where I think it's really important for us to have the conversations before the patient actually goes on bypass, so we can make give time and space to the important decisions around how we're going to practice in these scenarios. So having an informed decision as a clinical team would be probably critical.
Eugene, that's a fantastic comments and question. I think with our electronic data, we will be able to interrogate people's practices to see what impact changing how we perfuse during a case impacts outcome. And I think probably it's Professor Dice who's probably going to lead that. It's way beyond the skills of us mere mortals. But AI and machine learning will help us understand what the impact of changing practice during a case is. Because I'm very confident that it does impact. I don't believe that what we do during the case doesn't impact. So, I guess in the last decade, the word that has become very popular, and actually I can't even think that it's been used this whole meeting, is modifiable factors. I believe we can modify oxygen delivery, and I believe it's important, but I can't tell you what modifying during an individual case means. Thank you.
Don, I'm sorry. That was our last question. Yeah. And I'm sorry, there are so many wonderful questions online as well that we didn't get to. So if you want to reach out to our speakers personally. I know that they would love to answer your questions. And I had a bunch as well. So this was an awesome session. I am so honored to have been up here with these guys. So thank you guys for joining us for this session this morning. Again, I'm sorry we didn't get to your questions. Please join us back here at 9:30. We're going to have an awesome presentation on Perfusion Without Borders from Anita Parker, who is a student at Rush University. Thank you so much for this session this morning. Do I need to do anything with this?